Thank you, Las Corla. I'll be sharing my time, 8 minutes and 2 minutes, with Deputy Carol McNeill. I want to thank Deputy O'Reilly and Sinn Féin for bringing forward their proposals for additional support for victims of domestic violence, which allows us an opportunity to debate and discuss this very important issue. In the programme for government that was agreed last June, the three government parties called out the fact that in Ireland we're experiencing an epidemic of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence at the moment. And I think in recent months it's been incredibly positive to see the focus on the issue of DSGBV from the very substantive debates we've had in the Dáil and the Shannon, but more generally across society in terms of the support across communities and across towns for local domestic violence refuges. The impact of domestic violence on victims and families can be devastating physically and emotionally, and the range of supports that are required to help them move away from abusive situations and rebuild their lives. I've met stakeholders and frontline services in the DSGBV sector since taking on my current role as Minister, and I've expressed my own personal commitment to doing all that we can to address domestic violence and the effects on families, on victims and the wider society. The economic impact of domestic violence is not always at the forefront of people's minds when they consider the effect on victims, but in experiencing domestic violence can be a contributing factor to women experiencing homelessness and poverty. Lack of economic independence can also be a major factor in preventing a victim from leaving an abusive situation, and support for victims who are working in the form of paid leave could be crucial in ensuring that they retain their employment and have the economic capacity to escape an abusive relationship. Among the extensive list of policies contained in the programme for government that this government will pursue is a commitment to investigate the provision of paid leave and social protection provision to victims of domestic violence. For this reason, the government has agreed not to oppose this private member's bill this evening. However, there are a number of difficulties, both practical and legal, with the proposal set out, and there are other issues for consideration on how we best make this leave available. The principles behind the private member bill today are sound, but the government's view is that the Organisation of Working Time Act 97 is not the best vehicle for such a scheme. The role of the Workplace Relations Commission would also require close examination, and there are other issues which arise, such as concerns for the privacy of victims who could be obliged to reveal personal information in order to access the scheme. I think everyone would agree that it's absolutely paramount that any leave scheme protects the privacy of victims. Bearing in mind that we must, of course, act promptly, I am proposing today that the government will undertake an examination of paid domestic violence leave and social protection support, as we've committed to do in the programme for government. This examination will include a consultation and an examination of the concerns outlined above, as well as a review of the international best practice that a number of deputies referred to. The process will begin immediately and will conclude within 6 months, and I will publish a report setting out the findings. This will allow us the necessary time to consult widely with victims, with NGOs, with employers and social partners, and across government departments, to ensure that the proposals coming forward are victim-centred, are robust, and will work to genuinely help victims while preserving confidentiality. Following on from this examination and based on the findings, I will bring to government legislative proposals for the establishment of a statutory entitlement to paid domestic violence leave. This legislative proposal will be brought to government within a further 4 months of having received the consultation report, and this will represent the delivery of a key commitment of our programme for government commitments in terms of DSGBV. Progress continues on other DSGBV actions. As we know, responsibility for DSGBV is shared across a range of government departments and agencies. The programme for government commits to an audit of how responsibility for policy, services and other matters related to DSGBV is currently fragmented, with a view to developing proposals on what infrastructure is needed to ensure that the issue is dealt with as effectively as possible. The audit will be completed early next year, and following it, Minister McEntee and I will bring forward an action plan to implement its findings. TUSLA, which is under the remit of my department and has statutory responsibility for the care and protection of victims of DSGBV, it supports some 60 organisations nationwide that operate a range of services. In 2020, my department provided €25.3 million in funding for the provision of DSGBV services. 2 weeks ago, I was pleased to be able to confirm an increase in TUSLA's DSGBV allocation in 2021 to a total of €30 million. This includes €28 million in core funding, an increase of €2.7 million, and €2 million in COVID contingency supports. TUSLA is undertaking a review of emergency accommodation nationwide, which will assess current and required distribution of safe emergency accommodation in Ireland. The findings of this review will inform TUSLA's future decisions with regard to the priority areas for investment and the development of services. This report will be published in April next year, and I look forward to acting on its findings. As I mentioned earlier, I've had the opportunity to meet a number of the key NGOs working in the DSGBV sector, and I have more meetings scheduled for the new year. Last Friday, I was privileged to launch the Sunnis Annual Report 2019 in their refuge in my village, Blanchardstown. As part of this, I had the opportunity to sit down with one of the organisation's clients. She took me through her personal journey, the coercive control her partner exercised over her, the rare but still devastating physical abuse, the little steps she took to discover how she could get out, the day she finally left, the level of support offered to her by the NGO, and the continuing barriers she faced, the complexity of the legal system, the struggle for money, and the difficulty of locating safe and long-lasting accommodation for her and her family. This woman's struggle is mirrored every day in towns and communities all over our country, and for far too long our society has turned a blind eye to this. But I do believe we're seeing a sea change in how this issue is approached by our society. This government will not turn a blind eye to the issue of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. In the 6 months since we've been in office, we've acted swiftly. We've significantly increased funding for domestic violence services. We're conducting an audit of policy responsibility to ensure the best possible response for victims. We're undertaking a review of emergency accommodation capacity so we can properly target resources. We will pass legislation within the next few weeks to criminalise image-based abuse, legislation that was originally proposed by an opposition deputy. And we'll undertake implementation of the O'Malley report to support victims of sexual crimes when they're reporting those crimes and through the court system. I believe all of this represents a strong start, but I know we have much more to do. So I'd like to conclude by again thanking Sinn Féin for bringing forward this private member's bill today, and I look forward to working with deputies from all sides of the House to ensure that anybody at risk of domestic abuse feels safe, feels secure and feels supported. Thank you, Laskin.